guys, welcome back to the channel where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. Well, hopefully some of you remember this sweet face. This is little Thomas Valva, little Tommy. He died because of severe neglect. His father, his monster father, and his stepmonster, they are in prison for life for his death. Now, we had a grand jury just meet as far as the CPS's responsibility. And I have a lot of mixed feelings on that one.
Had CPS done its job, Thomas Valva would still be alive today.
After a 6-month special grand jury investigation, no charges are being filed against CPS workers. Thomas Valva was 8 years old when he died in 2020 of hypothermia after being forced to sleep in an unheated garage in freezing cold temperatures. There were more than 10 reports made to Child Protective Services by the little boy's teachers and school staff, alleging abuse by Thomas's ex-NYPD officer father and his father's then-fiancé. Caseworkers determined the allegations to be unfounded, which means under current law, they are sealed.
What steps did they take to investigate? Who did they interview? What findings did they make? We have no idea. We do not know, and we cannot find out because of existing New York State law.
The special grand jury heard from 27 witnesses. Their 75-page report recommends no criminal charges against the CPS caseworkers or supervisors investigating Thomas's case, but did propose a slew of reforms at the county and state level, including...
Sure, let's propose a slew of reforms, which I hope protects other kids, okay? Because as far as I'm concerned, and many others, CPS failed this boy. And they did find that they failed to protect little 8-year-old Tommy. The problem was, just as the state attorney just stated, that because they were unfounded by the caseworkers, they're sealed. So there's nothing the grand jury could really look at. And you had little Tommy himself, okay? Little Thomas Valva himself. He went to his school counselor, and there was a worker there, a child services worker, and he told them what was going on, and they did nothing. So I still believe the death of little Tommy is just as much the fault of Michael Valva, his father, stepmonster Angela Polina, and I also believe CPS needs to realize that they are really also at fault for the death of this young kid. He should not have been suffering that way at all. No one protected him. His mother tried everything she could, and guess what? Her sons tried to tell people. Nobody listened to this child.
Amending the state law that seals unfounded CPS reports to allow a grand jury or a district attorney access in certain cases. Amending a Suffolk County code to have a supervisor review any case where 3 or more reports are related to one case.
Yes, it's another reminder that 4 years ago a child died a death that was 100% preventable. But there's got to be action that follows, and that's where things tend to fall down. There's lots of reports issued every day. To the extent that there's action after them, that means the difference between life and death.
An attorney...
100%. He is 100% correct. There's no repercussions happening, okay? I realize that these workers are overloaded, they're overworked, but you had teachers, staff at that school. They had all these people asking for help, and it fell on deaf ears. There's no excuse for that. You know, when a child asks for help and the people around that child ask for help on their behalf, and CPS or Family Services does nothing and decides, oh, it's unfounded, and just, basically throws it in the garbage. I mean, that to me, they need to have consequences for it, and they're just not going to in this case.
For Thomas's mother, Justina Zupko Valva, issued a statement saying, in part, to say that CPS failed in this regard would be a gross understatement. They consciously ignored red flag after red flag, knowing that children were starving, abused, and made to sleep in a freezing basement. As Newsday has previously reported, 3 of the CPS workers involved in the Valva case were promoted after he died.
It didn't have to end the way it did.
For Newsday TV, I'm Shari Einhorn.
They're promoted. 3 of the people that contributed, in my opinion, and I know in his mama's opinion as well, Justina, the poor woman, they didn't lose their jobs, they didn't get in trouble, they got promoted. I mean, what ass word stuff is that? They contributed to the death of a child. And that's just not being taken seriously enough. I mean, we see these failures with family services and CPS all over the country. And this was just a big one. And if you follow this one, I mean, it's just alarming. It is alarming what happened to little Tommy and his brother. And all I could say is God helped save the other 2. It took, unfortunately, Thomas's life to save his other 2 brothers. And you know that those 2 brothers will never forget little Tommy, ever. He protected them, and it took his life to do it. And it shouldn't take another child's life to protect their sibling or, another child. Every child is important. Now, as far as the district attorney, what he was saying was that there was 11 separate reports, were made to CPS by the teachers, and that CPS deemed 10 of those cases unfounded. Which, again, I know they just said, we're changing it if there's 3 or more. Well, are not 1 or 2 not important enough? Yeah, I realize that there's people who call in false reports. Unfortunately, that's something that's going to happen. But, I mean, these were not false allegations whatsoever. And he had to say, anyone objectively looking at these facts will have no doubt that had CPS done its job, Thomas Valva would still be alive today. And that is D.A. Ray Tierney. We don't need an investigation for that, he added. Amen, sir. And that's why I think that his death is just as much on the CPS workers' hands. It is just as much on their heads as it is on Michael and Angela. And maybe they're not answering for it here in this life, but one day they're going to have to answer for that. As far as the statement from CPS, here's what they had to say about the findings, and I'm going to go through those a bit here as well. 8-year-old Thomas Valva's death followed repeat complaints made to Child Protective Services by Thomas's teachers and staff at East Moriches Elementary School over the course of almost 2 years. After Michael Valva's and Angela Polina's trials concluded, I promised that my office would investigate the conduct and practices of the Child Protective Services Division of Suffolk County's Department of Social Services. He did, and it took a very long time for this to happen. A special grand jury was impaneled and heard from dozens of witnesses over the course of 6 months. I thank the grand jurors for listening to sometimes heartbreaking testimony. Unfortunately, the grand jury's investigation was stipend by current New York state law, which allows CPS supervisors and bosses to suppress repeated reports of abuse they deem to be unfounded. Like, again, that confounds me. So, just because you found it unfounded, they're sealed and you can't they're suppressed and nobody can look at them later on to see if you were completely wrong, which they were. The statute allows these materials to be hidden from public scrutiny, law enforcement, and even from a grand jury investigating the death of a child. This backwards law must be changed. Absolutely no question in my mind. It is totally backwards ass words. You guys know what I mean. The system we currently have to protect our children is a recipe for disaster. Again, 100% I agree. And it's not just New York, guys. This is not just New York. It is unconscionable that even in a case such as this, no one, not even a district attorney, superior court judge, or state advisory board, can obtain prior reports that CPS had arbitrarily and erroneously deemed unfounded. The 75-page grand jury report released today highlights the systematic failures of the current Child Protective Services system and recommends local as well as statewide common sense changes to ensure that competence and apathy are not protected and a tragedy like the death of Thomas Valva does not happen again. It should never have happened to begin with. And everything that he said, I agree with. This, again, sealing this stuff so nobody can look at it. I mean, it's like, what the hell are y'all hiding? Where a grand jury, district attorney, a judge, no one can see it. I mean, one word comes to mind. Corruption. And I know New York's not a stranger to that word whatsoever. All right, so this is the special grand jury report. I'm going to kind of sift through it. I will link to it in the information of the video for those that would like to read it, because I know a lot of folks that follow this case are very interested as well. And I haven't gone through it, so I'm going to kind of sift through it with you guys. And again, it's still disturbing. Even though they found that they were negligent, they couldn't prosecute anybody for it. I mean, ridiculous. And that's like, adding injury to insult when 3 of the CPS workers, they got promoted. They're rewarded for their bad behavior. So here is the preliminary statement from the grand jury. The Suffolk County Supreme Court Special Grand Jury Term 10E was impaneled on September 13th, 2023 to investigate, among other things, the customs and practices of the Child Protective Services Investigations Bureau of the Family and Children Services Division of the Suffolk County Department of Social Services. The grand jury heard testimony from 27 witnesses and considered 56 exhibits, many consisting of separate documents and thousands of pages. As a result of this investigation, the following report has been adopted pursuant to New York State Criminal Procedure Law 190.851C and is hereby respectfully submitted to the court. All right, findings of fact. Introduction. In addition to numerous reports of maltreatment to the Child Protective Services Investigation Bureau, CPS, of Suffolk County's Department of Social Services, SCDSS, an 8-year-old autistic child, they're going to refer to him as Child A, died of hypothermia on January 17, 2020, after being forced by the child's father and the father's fiancée to sleep in their unheated Suffolk County garage. In the wake of this tragedy, this grand jury was impaneled to investigate the conduct and practices of Suffolk County's CPS for the purposes of A, identifying any failures or deficiencies in its conduct and practices, particularly as they related to the death of the young child, B, determining whether anyone associated with CPS or its related agencies should be held criminally liable for any such failures or deficiencies, and C, potentially making recommendations as to how to improve CPS's conduct and practices in order to increase protections for young victims of child abuse and maltreatment, in order to enact safeguards to identify similarly at-risk children in an attempt to prevent future tragedies from occurring. However, as described more fully below, this grand jury's ability to investigate these matters, particularly as they relate to reports of abuse, maltreatment, or neglect prior to the death of child A, have been severely hampered by the law governing the disclosure of records relating to reports declared by CPS to be unfounded. So they immediately hit this wall. And that is the most frustrating thing of all. I mean, everything else just comes piling after it. It's like a domino effect. Indeed, under that law, CPS caseworkers are effectively impervious to a grand jury investigation into their conduct in connection with such unfounded cases, since the underlying reports, the investigative materials related to those reports, and any discussion of those reports or investigative materials by CPS employees are shielded from this or any grand jury's investigative review. So basically, they are protected by, it's like a bubble. They should not be protected at all. If you did something wrong, I don't care if you put it, unfounded. Well, and the proper authority should be able to review all of these reports, period. Because that should not be the case, as will be seen below, we recommend that the law be changed to allow for the disclosure of unfounded files to a grand jury investigating CPS employee misconduct or suspected child abuse or maltreatment upon a court order finding that justice requires that the information in those reports is necessary for the determination of charges being investigated by that grand jury, and or to a district attorney upon a court order finding that justice requires that it is necessary for the purpose of prosecuting a violation of the penal law. We also recommend other changes, including improving the existing Suffolk County Child Advocacy Center, CAC, by co-locating at the facility members of CPS, the Suffolk County Police Department, SCPD, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, SCDAO, and other members of a multidisciplinary team, MDT, to improve communication and enhance the future investigations of child abuse and maltreatment. I like that recommendation. It should be completely enacted. Purpose and authority of Child Protective Services. CPS is the sole public entity responsible for receiving and investigating all reports of suspected child abuse and maltreatment by a parent, guardian, custodian, or other person legally responsible for the care of the child. CPS is also responsible for providing for or arranging and coordinating any services necessary to ensure the well-being and development of an abused or maltreated child, and to preserve and stabilize that child's family life whenever appropriate and to the extent possible. CPS is heavily regulated not only by the Social Services Law, Article 6, Title 6, Sections 411 through 428, but also by the Family Court Act, Article 10, which provides the legal authority for it to act, and by Title 18 of the Compilation of Codes, Rules, and Regulation of the State of New York, which contains numerous regulations governing all aspects of CPS activities. Each county is required to have a CPS within its Department of Social Services, and each CPS is locally administered, although its activities are overseen by the New York State Office of Children and Family Services, OCFS. OCFS also provides a several hundred-page, 15-chapter CPS program manual, which is intended for use by staff of each local CPS. The CPS program manual provides a comprehensive guide to caseworkers, incorporating all the laws, regulations, policies, and procedures governing CPS activities, and which includes instructions to caseworkers about how to conduct CPS investigations. The CPS program manual is also available to the public on the OCFS website. That's good to know. I may have to look that up. Organization of Child Protective Services. The SCDSS employs over 1,300 people. The division of SCDSS, titled Family and Children Services Administration, FCSA, encompasses the Child Protective Services Investigation Bureau, CPS, which conducts investigations, the Child Protective Preventative Service Bureau, CPPS, which provides or arranges for services, and the Child Placement Bureau, CPB, which handles foster care and adoptions. This grand jury investigation has focused primarily on the Investigations Bureau of CPS, which currently employs approximately 220 people, including caseworkers, supervisors, and support staff. CPS investigations had previously been one bureau, but as of January 2024, it is now divided geographically into two bureaus, one titled CPS Investigations West, the West Bureau, and the other CPS Investigations East, the East Bureau. The West Bureau has a bureau director, 4 assistant bureau directors, 2 abuse teams, a court-appointed investigations COI team, an intake unit, 2 family assessment response teams, FAR, and 8 investigative teams. The East Bureau has a bureau director, 4 assistant bureau directors, a special needs team, and 12 investigative teams. As will be more fully discussed below, the intake unit receives child abuse and maltreatment allegations for both bureaus from the State Central Register, SCR. The abuse teams handle the child abuse allegations. The FAR teams handle the family assessment response cases. The COI team handles court-ordered investigations. The special needs team handles cases involving children with special needs, such as autism, and the investigative teams handles the maltreatment allegations. There is also an emergency services unit that serves both bureaus by doing intake during non-business hours, like weekends, evenings, and holidays. A court unit that services both bureaus by assisting with applications for various forms of court order relief and several training units. The abuse teams have 1 supervisor and several senior caseworkers. Each of the other bureaus or units has 1 supervisor, a senior caseworker who will act as a supervisor when the supervisor is unavailable, and several non-senior caseworkers or caseworker trainees. Employment requirements and discipline and protections. Hiring. To become an entry-level CPS caseworker, an applicant is required to have a bachelor's degree, take a civil service examination, and receive a score high enough to be reached on the civil service list. The applicant must also have been cleared by the State Central Registry, SCR, which ensures that the applicant has never been the subject or an indicated report of child abuse or maltreatment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, however, the New York State waived the civil service examination requirement for new hires, which enabled the SCDSS to hire more caseworkers as part of a plan to reduce caseloads and thereby improve the quality of CPS investigations. Yeah, that's sketchy though still. This waiver, however, expires in December 2024. Well, it should have probably already expired in my opinion. This grand jury has heard testimony that the waiver should be renewed so that the SCDSS can continue to work to reduce caseloads, and that alternatively, the test should be eliminated altogether because it does not affect the job responsibilities of a caseworker. Okay. Discipline termination. According to the 2019 version of the SCDSS Employee Manual, which is the latest version of the manual, a written evaluation by a supervisor is required for all employees as follows. 1. 8 weeks after the employee is hired. 2. 2 weeks prior to the completion of probationary status. And 3. On an annual basis. An unsatisfactory evaluation in any job factor or as an overall assessment may require a follow-up evaluation. If the unsatisfactory rating is not corrected, SCDSS may initiate disciplinary procedures. An employee may submit a written rebuttal to an evaluation to his or her supervisor, which shall be placed in the employee's personnel file. Verbal reprimands by a supervisor are not to be placed in the employee's personnel file, and written remands by a supervisor should be removed and destroyed after 6 months if there are no further disciplinary actions during that period. Management staff are supposed to review evaluations when considering promotions, and an evaluation can be completed at any time a supervisor deems necessary. But despite the requirements of the SCDSS Employee Manual, annual written evaluations for full-fledged caseworkers has not been done on a regular basis for several years, with evaluations now only occurring currently when a specific problem has been identified. Yeah, that's a problem. This grand jury has heard testimony that yearly evaluations should be occurring and that supervisors should be trained on how to conduct such yearly evaluations. No kidding. This grand jury has also heard testimony that the SCDSS should have a better defined disciplinary process, because currently the process is based on one person making decisions, resulting in delays in addressing disciplinary issues and also in what could be a very subjective matter of making decisions based on one person's opinion. Accordingly, there should be a better defined human resources department addressing such matters. See, all this is important while I'm reading this is because the three got promoted. So obviously someone must have liked them. It should also be noted that caseworkers are unionized and are entitled to union representation during any interview, which could reasonably result in a disciplinary proceeding. Before any disciplinary action can be taken by SCDSS, a caseworker is entitled to a hearing pursuant to Section 75 of the New York State Civil Service Law. After any such hearing, the hearing officer will make a recommendation to the SCDSS commissioner, who will then decide whether to follow the recommendation. Immunity. Under Social Services Law 419, CPS caseworkers are provided with immunity from civil and criminal liability for actions taken in the course of their employment unless it can be shown that they engaged in willful misconduct or gross negligence in carrying out their duties. Such immunity does not preclude the initiation of criminal or civil proceedings, but it does provide a legal defense if such proceedings are commenced. The statute essentially establishes a presumption of good faith for actions taken by CPS workers when carrying out their duties. Yeah, I don't like that at all. I think generally it probably works, but it doesn't work all the time. And obviously in Thomas's case, they just should not have a blanket immunity over them at all. And I'm sure there's many other cases just like it. However, even though immunity does not preclude a finding of criminal liability for CPS caseworkers who have engaged in willful misconduct or gross negligence, such caseworkers are still effectively impervious to any such liability in cases where reports are deemed unfounded. This is because, except when, as will be described below, unfounded reports and their underlying materials are migrated into a subsequent indicated case, the reports in the investigative materials and information related to those reports are legally sealed and shielded from review by a grand jury or by a district attorney's office and may not be disclosed or discussed by CPS employees. Yeah, this is their sketchy part, isn't it? Thus, evidence of willful misconduct or gross negligence by caseworkers contained within reports deemed unfounded is effectively impossible to obtain by prosecuting authorities. This right here, boom, this grand jury got it down. So we have no idea how grossly negligent these caseworkers were. Well, we know, but we just don't have the proof. In this regard, employees of CPS have the unilateral ability to thwart criminal investigations prior to the matter of immunity even becoming relevant by determining that a case is unfounded or by deciding not to migrate prior unfounded reports and related materials in a new indicated investigation. Yeah. This is a problem. Blanket immunity. Oh, we decided it was unfounded. They don't have a lot of folks doing their reviews. They want to toss out some of these other things to, so they can get more caseworkers out there. Again, I understand that CPS, they have a lot. They have a lot to do. And there's probably never enough caseworkers. Because sadly, our country's got a lot of issues. But our kids are suffering. These innocent children like Tommy. So they get to suffer because of this. And you can't even hold these individuals accountable. You can't even hold them accountable. So you can see it goes through more of how their training goes here, and you can see again, this is a 75-page report. It is big. So I kind of just wanted to go through that basic part because that ticks me off immensely. Again, this child was not protected, and we will never know because of this bubble, this lock, under lock and key, these unfounded reports. Because John Smith, or whoever these CPS workers were, these 3 CPS workers, decided, oh, all these reports by his teachers, nothing. They mean nothing. They're unfounded. So, who else looked at it? And how much of these were deemed quote-unquote unfounded because they had too much to do and they just wanted to move on to the next case? In my opinion, it's disgusting. And again, the fact that they were promoted is even worse. So, the failure on the CPS's part, we all knew they failed. And while this grand jury report, it gives us that in writing, but we can't do a damn thing about it. Obviously, it's New York State, Suffolk County. They can't punish these people. And I hope that, I really hope that this is going to protect some other kids, because these suggestions that they made should not be just suggestions. They just need to be enacted. If enough people were to be following up on these reports, these tips from these teachers. I mean, teachers are busy, okay? They don't have time to just call in or whatever and go, hey, this kid is being abused. They come in, they're soiling themselves, they're eating out of the trash can. They said they're sleeping on the floor in the garage. I mean, all these things that were happening to Tommy and his brother. Do you think that the teachers are going to call in to make up all this stuff? And also, do you think they're going to call in unless they feel like there's something really going on? It's to me, it's disgusting. And those CPS caseworkers should be ashamed of themselves. And I hope that they see Tommy's face every night before they go to sleep. Because they are just as much a part of his death, in my opinion, as Michael and Angela. And again, they're going to have to answer for it. It's not going to be here, I guess, but one day they're going to have to answer for that. They will. All right, guys, I hope you have a great rest of the day. And most of all, stay safe.